Fethullah Gulen, a name that brings up so much, whispered in halls of power, debated, so much intrigue and controversy. He died recently, but his story, wow, captivated the world.
It really has, hasn't it? Twists and turns, a story that goes from quiet Turkey countryside to, the global stage. Religion, politics, power.
So, for this deep dive, we're using a recent CNN article as a starting point. It covers Gulen's death, but we've got other sources too, to really try and get, sense of the man, his movement. How did a rural preacher from Turkey build a global network, became so key in Turkish politics, and then ends up in self-imposed exile, accused of masterminding a coup?
It's complex, yeah. It all starts with young Fethullah Gulen, preaching in rural Turkey. But he wasn't just any preacher. He had charisma, connecting with people, really set him apart.
There was something specific about his message, right?
Absolutely. Think about the context. Many devout Muslims in Turkey, they felt marginalized by the country's, secular establishment. They felt like their values, their beliefs were ignored, even suppressed. Gulen offered them, well, something different.
So he's speaking to this segment of society that's unheard, unseen. And what was at the core of his message? What was he saying?
Gulen emphasized a few things: education, interfaith dialogue, serving others. He called his movement Hizmet, which, by the way, means service in Turkish.
Yeah.
And he urged his followers to go out, make a positive impact on the world, build bridges, not walls. That resonated with people who were looking for a more inclusive Islam, a more tolerant form of Islam.
It wasn't just talk, though, right? They actually put these ideas into action.
Oh, for sure. They built schools, first in Turkey, then spreading globally, open to all students from all backgrounds, emphasizing not just, academics, but character development, ethical values. That hands-on approach, with Gulen's inspiring message, it gained traction, especially among lower middle-class families who saw education as, well, a path to a better life.
So the movement grows, gains influence in Turkey and around the world. And then 1999, Gulen makes a big move. He leaves Turkey, settles in the U.S., a small town in Pennsylvania, of all places.
Fascinating turn, right? His supporters said health reasons, but critics saw it differently. A strategic move, maybe escaping scrutiny from the Turkish government. Suspicions grew. Did he want to undermine the secular state, establish an Islamic system?
And this move sets the stage for a huge clash with someone who was once his ally, Recep Tayyip Erdoğan.
When Erdoğan's party came to power in 2002, the AKP, Gulen, and his movement, they were supportive, shared a dislike for the old guard, the secularists in Turkey. Evidence suggests that Gulenists in the government actually helped Erdoğan in those early years, consolidate his power.
So what went wrong? This alliance, it falls apart so badly.
So many factors: power dynamics shift, ambitions clash. The Gulen movement, it became really influential within the police, the judiciary. And this, I think, made Erdoğan nervous, a potential rival, a threat to his authority.
And then there's accusations of corruption against officials in Erdoğan's government. Some saw that as the Gulen movement trying to, weaken Erdoğan's hold on power.
Yeah, tensions escalate. Erdoğan starts denouncing publicly what he called dark circles within the state, targeting the Gulen movement, calling them a fifth column, operating secretly to undermine him. A huge shift from allies to, bitter rivals.
Classic power struggle. Two forces vying for control, each one seeing the other as a threat to their existence. And then this tension, this animosity, it explodes, the attempted coup in Turkey in 2016.
And here's where it gets even more complex, even more controversial.
The CNN article goes into detail about that night, the violence, the chaos, the fear, and afterward, one name on everyone's lips: Fethullah Gulen.
Erdoğan, he immediately blames Gulen. Orchestrating the coup from Pennsylvania, demands his extradition, calls him a terrorist, leader of what he called FETO, a terrorist organization.
And Gulen denied everything, right?
Completely. Said he was appalled by the violence, had nothing to do with it.
But too late. The damage was done.
Yeah. The coup attempt and the accusations, they changed Gulen's life, his legacy. He went from respected, albeit controversial figure, to enemy number one. In Turkey, the impact of that night, it's still felt today, not just in Turkish politics, but globally, its relationship with the United States.
And that's where we'll pick it up next time. We'll look at the accusations against Gulen, the crackdown on his followers, and how this all affected U.S.-Turkish relations.
It's a story about power, betrayal, and the fight between secularism and religion in Turkey.
A reminder that even someone who seems far from power can be right at the heart of events that change the world. Stay with us as we continue to explore this complex and captivating story. So we're left with this really complex picture of Fethullah Gulen, built this global network of schools, championed interfaith dialogue, but also accused of plotting to, well, overthrow the government he once supported.
Yeah, it's a bit like looking through, one of those kaleidoscopes. Each turn shows you a different side of Gulen of the movement, and those sides, they can be pretty different depending on who's holding it.
Exactly, because you have all these accounts of Gulen as a peacemaker, an educator, but then this completely different story comes out, painting him as, like, this puppet master with a dangerous agenda.
Both those narratives, they're part of Turkish society, right?
Yeah.
And that creates a very, very polarized environment. Just saying Gulen's name, it can lead to, like, heated argument.
Yeah. And the CNN article we talked about, it mentions how the Turkish government, they officially labeled Gulen's movement as a terrorist organization. A FETO. That's a big deal, right?
It really is. And remember, FETO, it stands for Fethullahist Terrorist Organization.
Yeah.
That label alone tells you how the Turkish government saw the entire movement. And it allowed them to do a lot, arrest tons of people. People lost their jobs, faced persecution, just because they were suspected of maybe having Gulenist sympathies.
It's hard to grasp the scale of it. Teachers, journalists, even people in the judiciary, basically anyone seen as a potential Gulen supporter.
Yeah, and that's where it gets really concerning. Because, some people argue that the coup attempt, as awful as it was then used to just silence anyone who disagreed with the government to consolidate power. Critics point out that a lot of those targeted, they weren't even part of the Gulen movement. They were just seen as maybe, threatening to Erdoğan's authority.
So it wasn't just about, like, getting rid of Gulenists, but also any opposition, even if it wasn't real.
That's the argument, yes.
Yeah.
And it created this atmosphere in Turkey where people were afraid to speak up, to say anything the government might not like. Because, what if they get labeled as a Gulen supporter? Who knows what could happen?
Yeah. It's scary how fear and suspicion, they can be used like that to, weaken democracy, to stop people from speaking freely.
For sure. And it raises these important questions about the long-term effects on Turkey, on its institutions, on how it interacts with the rest of the world.
And speaking of those relationships, the coup attempt, it really impacted U.S.-Turkish relations, right? Erdoğan wanted Gulen extradited from the U.S., but they refused, said there wasn't enough evidence.
Right. That refusal caused problems. Relations were strained for years. The U.S. said they needed proof, concrete proof, of Gulen's involvement. But the Turkish government insisted that he was behind it all, that letting him stay in the U.S. was like betraying their alliance. It created this deadlock, made it hard for them to work together on, security, trade, all sorts of things.
And Gulen, he stayed in Pennsylvania living this quiet life, but at the center of this international storm.
It's kind of bizarre when you think about it. Accused of starting a coup from, halfway across the world, but living this normal life. It's like he was detached from the chaos he supposedly caused.
Now that Gulen's gone, I wonder what will happen to the movement he started. Will it keep going, or will it, slowly fade away without him?
That's a good question. A lot of people are asking that. Hizmet, it's always been decentralized, rooted in communities. But Gulen, he was the face of it, the leader.
So it's possible that without him, it'll, break apart, different groups forming, each with their own interpretation of his teachings.
It could happen, yeah. It'll be interesting to see how things change in the next few years. Will the movement find new leaders, new ways to operate, especially now that they face so much scrutiny, so much repression?
Or will they, start fighting among themselves and eventually lose their influence? Only time will tell, I guess.
That's right. But one thing's for sure. Gulen's legacy, people will be talking about it, debating it for a long time.
And there's so much information out there, so many different stories. How can our listeners, make sense of it all? Where should they even start?
Well, it's important to be critical, right? There's no easy answer, no one truth about Gulen and his movement.
So it's about, going beyond the headlines, digging deeper, looking at evidence from different sources.
Absolutely. And being aware of bias. Both the Turkish government and Gulen supporters, they want to shape the narrative to fit their agenda. So read between the lines. Think about why that information is being presented. And then, make up your own mind based on the facts.
Sounds like a lesson in media literacy, being able to think critically about all the information that's thrown at us every day.
It is. And it's becoming more and more important these days. Information gets weaponized, used to manipulate people.
So with all that in mind, what are some key things our listeners should keep in mind as they try to navigate this really complex landscape?
Well, first of all, remember that Fethullah Gulen, for all his complexities and contradictions, he was a real person, not just a symbol or a political tool. He had beliefs, he had flaws, he had this vision for the world that, well, it connected with millions of people.
It's a reminder to, like, humanize even those figures who seem, larger than life, especially when they're caught up in political battles, these ideological divides.
Exactly. And it's also important to acknowledge the good things that the Hizmet movement did. Their
Yeah.
schools, they provided good education to so many kids. Their social service programs, they really made a difference in communities.
So we're not saying the entire movement was bad or dangerous. It's about understanding that even within these complex organizations, there can be genuine efforts to do good.
Precisely. And last but not least, remember that Gulen's story, it isn't over. His death, it's the end of one era, but the beginning of another. And it's an era filled with uncertainty, with potential.
So it's going to be fascinating to watch how his legacy changes, how the movement adapts, how everything he set in motion continues to shape the world.
And it's a story that deserves our attention, our careful thought,
Yeah.
our understanding.
It's really something, one man's life. And it becomes so connected to global events, international relations, debates that still go on even after he's gone.
Yeah, I think Gulen's story, it shows us the power of ideas, how they can, spread out, change lives,
Yeah.
influence history.
We've done this whole deep dive, but it still feels like we just, I don't know, scratched the surface a little.
Always more to learn, more perspectives to think about. But we've, tried to highlight some important things for you.
Right. We looked at how Gulen started from, well, nothing really. The Hizmet movement growing, their work with education, social services, and then that big change in his relationship with Erdoğan.
And we went into the accusations, right? The idea
Yeah.
that there was a secret plan, the controversies with the coup attempt and the crackdown, that really shook Turkish society.
And then there's the tension between the U.S. and Turkey, the impact of Gulen's legacy, which, people still argue about.
So as you think about all this, what sticks out to you? What are you still, thinking about?
I keep coming back to motivation. What was Gulen really after? Was it pure altruism? Did he want to help this community with education and service? Or was there something else going on? Ambition? Did he want to change Turkey according to his vision?
That's the question, isn't it? And it's one that I think it's going to keep historians and analysts busy for a while. Human motivations, they're not always simple.
No, not at all. There's often a mix, right? Idealism, being practical, wanting to help others, but also maybe personal goals. And in Gulen's case, it's even more complicated because of the whole political and religious context in Turkey.
You have to remember the time he came from. Lots of social and political changes in Turkey. People were arguing about the role of Islam in society.
So his message about education, service, dialogue between faiths, it made sense to people. They wanted spiritual guidance, but also a way to improve their lives.
But then, that same message, some people saw it as the threat, like he was challenging the secular system. So then the suspicion starts, the idea of a hidden agenda.
And that's the problem with, those easy stories. We can't just say Gulen was good or bad, a hero or, I don't know, a villain. It's more complicated than that.
His story, it's like a warning about how dangerous it is to simplify things, to put complex people, movements into neat little boxes.
Right. We have to look at the gray areas, the parts that don't fit. That's where we learn. That's where we understand.
Now that Gulen's passed away, what will happen to his movement? Will they change, adapt? Will they find new leaders, new ways to do things, especially now that they're facing so much pressure?
Or will they, split up, different groups, each with their own take on Gulen's teachings? And that could lead to, well, even more division.
And what about the U.S. and Turkey? Will things improve now, or will they still have that mistrust, that anger?
Lots of open questions. And you, our listener, you can keep exploring those questions. Look at different sources, have discussions, question what you think you know.
There isn't one right answer about Fethullah Gulen or the movement he started. It's a story that makes you think critically, to analyze, to be willing to, face some uncomfortable truths.
So keep digging deeper, keep asking those questions, keep trying to understand. That's what really matters.
And that's what this deep dive is all about. Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you next time.